All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you have never checked out the podcast before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. Today, we have a great interview for you. On the line is Teresa Strasser. Teresa, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure. Let me tell you, Teresa has quite the resume. She has been a contributor to the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, the Arizona Republic, the Jewish Journal, the Huffington Post, and the Today Show. Her first-person essays have garnered 3 Los Angeles Press Club awards, including Columnist of the Year. She's appeared on The View, CNN, Good Morning America, The Talk, and Dr. Phil. Well, I'm getting nervous now, Teresa. I better be on the top of my game here talking to you.
You just made me so sad that Dr. Phil went out of business because
Oh,
I would have loved to be able to go on Dr. Phil and promote this book. I remember 10 years ago with my first book, I went on Dr. Phil and it was a surreal experience because he held up my book right to the camera, and he's like, camera 1. He holds up the book. Y'all, you are going to laugh till it hurts when you read this book. And you know what? Made the bestseller list that week for 1 week and never again. But technically,
oh.
I'm still a bestseller.
Well, that's all that matters. And the imitation was pretty good. Yes, pretty good.
Yeah.
Doctor, no matter how flat you get that pancake, there's still 2 sides to it, right? Okay.
You know what? Dr. Phil is an incredibly smart man.
Oh, of
And I
course.
ended up doing his show maybe a dozen times. He would have me on and do man on the street stuff and, just asking people what I should name my baby when I was pregnant and stuff like that. And he was so smart, so insightful. So he is not what I would have thought. He is an incredibly thoughtful and intellectual guy, but he just
Yeah.
does the homespun aphorisms. So you think he's that guy, but he's really a genius. Otherwise, I don't think Oprah, would have promoted him the way she did.
Yeah. I'm sure he's he's a well-rounded guy. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and I agree with a lot of what he says. I mean, absolutely, 100%. I do want to throw in there that radio and podcast audiences also know you as Adam Carolla's co-host. And her first memoir, Exploiting My Baby Because It's Exploiting Me, was a Los Angeles Times bestseller and was
For
optioned
1 week. 1 week.
for 1 week. Hey, but that's 1 week. That's more than I got.
And yes, it was optioned by ABC. I should never interrupt my own intro.
That's
I'm really
okay.
enjoying this.
That's good. No, I'm okay with it. Now, the latest book, or I should say the book we're talking about today anyway, Making It Home, Life Lessons from a Season of Little League. And once again, the author's name, Teresa Strasser, if you want to, give it a look for it online. Teresa, let's kind of start with some of the basics. Let's give the audience a little bit of, make you a person, so to speak. Or where are you from?
I'm from San Francisco, in the city of San Francisco. My parents were hippies, and I have serious hippie kid bona fides. For example, my mom ran a coffee shop in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood of San Francisco,
Oh,
and it was called, are you ready for this? Coffee shop called Sacred Grounds.
wow. Well,
Mhm.
that's
Free Starbucks.
yeah, pretty strong. Well, that Haight-Ashbury district is pretty legendary. And obviously, you're very well accomplished in media and writing and all these other types of talents. Is that something you've always had a passion for? Were you one of those kids that kind of, when you were like in first grade or whatever, had a little box set up and that was your camera and you pretended like you were on TV and all this? Is that what you were doing?
Billy, I'm freaked out right now. That's very insightful. I write about this a little bit in Making It Home. I definitely was very feral as a kid. My parents got divorced when I was 3. My mom was in San Francisco. My dad was in LA, and I took the Greyhound in between. And one of the things I did to kill time was I had a little tape recorder and I would be doing the news. Like I would be reporting the news from the
Yeah.
Greyhound, the weather, the traffic, and recording it for nobody, just to do it, just to kill, 10 hours on a bus.
Yes, I'm kind of with you there. I have cassette tapes of myself DJing before my voice changed. So Here is the Bee Gees, because I was real little when they came out. So anyway, that's interesting. The book does kind of deal with grief and the association of baseball and kind of how you use that as a tool. Let's talk about grief a little bit, because I'll tell you why. I think that's an emotion that a lot of times is misunderstood. There's the adage, time shall pass, but it doesn't always work that way. That's kind of a misconception about grief. You kind of get it to the point where you manage it. It doesn't manage you. Or at least that's been my experience with it. Do you want to talk about what grief is to you?
Yeah, so I wrote this book about one season of baseball, and that is the season after my brother died. He died of cancer at 47. And following that, my dad and I watched my son play Little League. And it was over the course of that season that we became a grief group of two. We used baseball to process the losses that we were having. My mom died 4 months to the day after my brother. So we had compound losses, and we use baseball as just a grief group. It worked on any number of levels. I think if for anyone who's gone through a trauma or a grief, it's sort of like a bright light in your face.
Mhm.
Um, and as time passes, it moves away and it gets less bright, and you can have time and space and room to see other things. But for us, baseball was a break in a way
Mhm.
because and my grief counselor, I don't know if she coined this phrase or if this is a thing, but when I was telling her about the book, I said, I write about these baseball games and then I write about grief and I go back and forth. And she said, "Oh my gosh, that's adaptive oscillation." What that means is, for example, when she's counseling somebody who's grieving and she specializes in that, she
Mhm.
frequently will say, if you can go back to work, go back to work. Because otherwise, that bright light is in your face all the time. Whereas
Yeah.
if you can return to normalcy. So for my dad and I, this season, 2 games a week for my older son, which, this story's mostly about his team, the Purple Pinstripes, which my
Okay.
dad and I got way, way too into. Um, and then my younger son, who was just, in T-ball at the time, 2 games for him. So if nothing else, we had to show up 4 times a week on a schedule, and it gave us a reprieve from the bright light, and
Mhm.
it gave us some normalcy. And then there was baseball itself. And my dad and I became a team. We're a family that became a team, and our team became a family. And this was all happening on the sidelines behind the first baseline. We were so deeply, deeply into this team. And we are talking about 9 and 10-year-olds. And I
Yeah.
don't know if I can ever explain it to somebody that hasn't been a sports parent, but it's sort of like a microcosm, really, for parenting in general, because when your kid's out on the diamond pitching or your kid's at bat, there is nothing that you can do to will your kid
Yeah.
to hit the ball or to throw a strike. You experience this helplessness and you're rooting so hard for your kid. And you know in your heart and in your soul that there's a separation. There's a fence between you and the diamond, and there's some kind of invisible scrim, and you will not be able to protect your kids from life. And I remember my dad, once my son struck out and we were just devastated. We were just had no chill. We had no perspective. This is what we were living for. And I remember my dad saying under his breath, "T, you can't protect your kids from life." And I knew that what he was talking about was something, far darker. And that is, he couldn't protect his child from cancer, from dying.
Yeah.
And so, I understood that he knew better than I did, but I was experiencing this helplessness in these small doses, like the separateness between me and the kids, and how I was going to have to relinquish, that feeling that I could make everything okay for them, because I'm not that powerful, and neither was my dad, neither is anybody.
Yeah. We were talking before the show, and I talked about how I was from the land of football here in northeastern Ohio, and quite honestly, football is a beer and pizza sport. That's what it is. What is it about baseball? There's something about baseball that has a certain intellectualism. I will say there's a certain magic that comes with baseball. I don't know whether it's because it's long history but like the Field of Dreams type stories, there's a certain magic that comes with baseball that you don't have with other sports. Am I right about that? What is it about baseball that gives it that magic?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. I'm so glad you asked this question. So you brought up Field of Dreams. There's also Angels in the Outfield. There's
Yeah.
a generational thing about baseball, and there's a couple things. Um, so baseball has the potential, a game of baseball could potentially go on forever,
Right.
right? Because there's the bottom of the inning. So it has the theoretical potential to be timeless. And I think that gives baseball a certain
Mm.
something, a certain magic. It always it comes back in the spring. You always, you get another at bat, you get another inning. There's something, there's like a rebirth to it inherent in the sport itself. And there's also for us, I think part of the reason it was so comforting is because things had gone out of order in my family.
Mhm.
A father had outlived his child. Whereas in baseball, the rules of Little League have barely changed since 1939. That's when the first Little League game was played. Oddly enough, completely coincidentally, Making It Home, my book about Little League, comes out June 6th. And June 6th is the day the very first Little League game was played in 1939. Now, there's a comfort to knowing that these are the same basic rules that have been around since 1939. And, fair is fair and foul is foul. These are the chalk lines. You know what to expect. And in a chaotic world, there can be something so comforting about that. And I think that's another part of the magic of baseball. But one of the reasons it makes a great framework for a story about grief and loss, Billy, is that, as my dad would say to my kids, you could fail 6 times out of 10 and still be in the Hall of Fame. I
Yeah.
mean, think about how much failure and loss and frustration that you have to tolerate to be great at baseball. There is a lot of losing involved.
Mhm.
Even if you win a lot of games, you're again, if you're the best in the world, you will not get on base 6 out of 10 times.
Yeah. That's really an interesting point, and so many analogies have been, written up about that, about the how many times Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron and all those people actually struck out as opposed to hitting a home run. So those are all great points, and I do think there's a certain magic that comes with baseball for all the reason that you said. Now, you had what you describe as a complicated relationship with your father, and this time that you spent together at the baseball games and everything helped that as well. So you want to talk a little bit about that? What do you mean it was complicated? You just were you like a rambunctious child and you just kind of set those stages up with your father, or was it something else?
Well, old man Strasser was fixing cars 6 days a week, and I don't think he was prepared for the lifestyle of being a single dad of two toddlers. So when my parents got divorced, and again, they were
Mm.
hippies, things were different then. I was 3 and my brother was 5. And my dad was awarded full custody of both of us.
Mm.
And then the reality hit. So we had this babysitter. She quit because she was team my mom, so he was by himself. And I don't know if you've been around toddlers lately, but a 3 and 5-year-old is kind of
Mm.
that's a lot. And
Yeah.
my dad, he ran at Delta Battery, his garage there in the San Fernando Valley, and he worked on Saturdays. And he couldn't take care of us, and he was in over his head. So he elected to return me to my mom. So at 3 and a half, I lived with my mom in San Francisco. My
Hmm.
brother stayed with my dad in LA. And that was the first thing that complicated the relationship because
Right.
my brother and I were divided. And then I also had an evil stepmother, um, who was evil until the day she died. And I had a lot of resentment that my dad had exposed us to her. And so our relationship was complicated. Then as an adult, he was had gone bankrupt a couple times. I co-signed on his house, which was foreclosed on, so my credit was destroyed. And there was just like I had a garden full of grudges that I had been watering against my dad. But the thing about baseball, bring it back, is that there's so much redemption possibility baked into the sport. I've seen so many baseball games as the mother of 2 baseball players. I cannot tell you how many times a kid, one of my kids or one of the others, had struck out both at bats, then comes up, huge hit. Or a kid
Right.
makes an error, that's the same kid that makes the double play to win the game. There are endless possibilities for redemption within baseball because of that timeless thing, because there's no time limit on a game, because a team can always, always, always come back. And I think for my dad, being a grandparent was his shot at redemption because he couldn't go back and be a better dad. But
Yeah.
during this season, he was the only grandparent that was at every single game, 4 games a week. And nobody was rooting harder for their grandkid, and he's an amazing grandfather. And in that sense, that it's hard to be mad at somebody who's rooting for your kids as hard as you are.
Yeah. And you consider him to be kind of like the hero of the memoir. Is that correct?
Yeah, I always joke that when I started writing it, I was it was the hero's journey, Billy, but I was the hero. Like, look at me. I lost my brother and yet I soldiered forward to be a parent to my kids, and I forgave my day drinking trailer park dwelling dad who gave me away. And
Mhm.
what a hero am I? Well, a few chapters into it, I realized it was a hero's journey, but the hero was my dad because
Mhm.
he was the most changed. And um the things the things that he went through with my brother, I mean, he quit his job to take care of my brother. He would stay with my brother for months at a time. When my brother was dying, he was in and out of different hospitals and rehab places because he was too sick to be home. My dad, it didn't matter where he was. My dad was sleeping in recliners and on cots, and he never once complained. And he had a sunny disposition all the way through, and he didn't flinch in the face of something so horrendous that few people, can or should imagine it.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. I've had a lot of conversations about parents who lose children, and there's a dynamic there. I mean, any loss can be very painful, even someone you just are good friends with, depending on the relationship. But there's something about outliving your children that I was talking about this the other day. There's words for like a widow and a widower. There's people who are orphaned, meaning you've lost your parents, but there is no word for a parent who has lost a child because it's kind of that. I'll say unspeakable. It's such an awkward thing to have to deal with. So I certainly, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have a lot of empathy for that, Teresa, and it's great that he has become your hero. I know that some of the things you talked about there were tough to go through at the time, but everybody exists in a certain time and place, and that certain time and place changes all the time. So it's like the old adage about stepping into the river. No man can step into the same river twice because he's never quite the same man. It's never quite the same river. So you kind of have to take that into account when you review these things. Now you have a passion for baseball and little league. And you kind of spoke already about why you like baseball. Is there a reason why with little league? And I kind of throw this in there. This might be kind of a curveball, but
Ah.
it's yeah, I always gotta throw a curveball. I can't let you off can't let you off too easy. Um, I think that the appreciation for baseball, let's say, um, has waned in with sports in general because of the fact that kids really today, I've noticed, not that interested in moving. They're in their own little world, and I don't necessarily. It's one thing to say kids don't get exercise anymore because they're sitting around all the time looking at their iPads or whatever. That's what the other aspect about it. But the other thing that really scares me is everyone's isolated. They have their phone, they have their earplugs in, they're listening into music or whatever, only what they like. They won't listen to what you like, and they're in their own little world. I think that baseball gives kids in particular an opportunity to interact with other people, work towards a common goal. That's kind of a cliche, but am I right about any of that? Why are you so passionate about baseball?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's a cliche, but yes, you are completely right. And I know you played football, right? And it's a
Mhm.
similar thing. So my husband coaches. He coaches every year, and he is the most Moneyball Little League coach that you've ever met. He's got spreadsheets and algorithms. The kids try out and they're ranked, and then there's a draft. no Little League coach in the history of the Little League of America takes it more seriously than my husband. Now, as a result of that, he's not out there drafting our friends' kids, our kids' friends. He's going to draft the next best player. Now, as you probably know from your football days, if a coach puts together a team that way, you're not going to know anybody. So you probably got on a team and these weren't kids from necessarily from your neighborhood, or these weren't kids from your
Hmm.
friends group. Almost every season in baseball for my kids, and my husband's coached both my boys every year, uh, they don't know a single kid on the team. So you are thrust together in this dugout with these kids, and now you're depending on each other, right? So here's another thing about baseball, and it's a team sport, but of course it's very individual. I mean, when
Sure.
you're on the mound pitching, you're all alone. When you're at bat, you're all alone, and the
You're it.
spotlight's on you. However, one thing that my husband drilled into the kids during the season that my book takes place. Making It Home takes place the season during 2019, and the kids were 10U, so 9 and 10. My husband drilled into them during every practice to hit their cutoff man. Now, here is how it really is a team sport in some instances in Little League. If that ball goes out to the outfield, if it gets by your shortstop, your second
Hmm.
baseman, or whatever, some kid drills it out to the fence. A little kid that's in the outfield was placed out there for one reason. Why, Billy? Because he's not good at baseball. That's why he's not in the infield. And that's why that little dude is way out in center or right. So that kid has one job. He has got to get the ball back to his cutoff man in the infield. If he can scramble after that ball as fast as he can, and because he's out there because he doesn't have an arm. There's no way he's getting it, anywhere near. But if he hits the cutoff man, then that kid throws the ball back to the pitcher. Now the ball's dead. Game,
Hmm.
play stops, and you've limited the damage. Maybe the kid's got a double, maybe a triple. Now, if the kid's coming toward home, the pitcher can even make a play, right? So that
Hmm.
means 2 and maybe 3 kids are involved in curtailing the damage on a hit, right? And it's
Yeah.
all about hitting your cut. That was drilled into them from day 1. And so you've gotta trust that you're gonna have a backup, that someone's gonna be there, that they're gonna wave their hands, "I'm here. Give me the ball, and I'll get the ball in for you."
Hmm. I'm getting that this is something that is a part of your lifestyle now, that this grief therapy, for lack of a better term, with you and your dad is now a part of your life. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, that's pretty obvious. It's You light up when you talk about this. So this has definitely brought a lot of energy into your life.
Well, when as a football fan, which I know you are, true or false, have you ever had a conversation with somebody, whether it's your dad, a brother, a friend, and you are only talking about football, and yet you are having a richly hued emotional conversation. You are exchanging real feelings and thoughts. Ostensibly, you're just talking about the game,
Right.
but there's act like that. So that's how it is with my dad and I. So the little league season just ended last week. Our team won the minor league championships again, back to back wins.
All
My
right.
husband's very very good coach. My little one plays, and my older one's 13, so he plays what they call travel ball or club ball. He's a
Okay.
he's a big lefty. He pitches. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't want to live in a world where my kids are on their devices, or I'm telling them when to get off their Xbox, or they're in their phones and they don't know how to deal with people. And
Yeah.
because they play baseball, they have a reason to be out in the world and to be part of a team and to hone their skills and to learn how to tolerate frustration, because baseball's very hard,
Yeah.
and you will have a slump, and you will walk kids, and kids will hit home runs off you. And by the way, you will get hit by a pitch. In Little League,
Yep.
every kid is going to get tagged, and that ball can come in pretty hot.
Oh, I actually, that happened to me when I played a little league too. So I could speak about that firsthand. Another curveball, one more curveball. Obviously, we're talking a little bit about grief today, but I would go as far to say that kids today, and not just kids, but adults, because of the fact that they're in what I would call virtual realities. A lot of the time, this is where a lot of depression and a lot of other things can kind of take hold. And we hear so much about mental health. I think the relationship between mental health and physical activity is so understated. You very seldom hear people talk about that. For you is it's got to be pretty obvious the relationship between physical activity, and even if it's just lifting weights or whatever, the physical activity, walking, whatever, is so important for mental health. Would you agree with that?
I couldn't agree more, and that's one of the things I've learned from my dad. I write about this a lot in the book. My dad does not have a car. He only rides his bike. And I really believe that's part of the reason he was able to survive this
Mm.
traumatic loss of his child. He is so kinetic. He's always moving, and he always says to me when I'm down, "Let's go for a walk. You can't be depressed when you're moving, T. You can't be depressed when you're moving." And,
Yeah.
when we're nervous before a game, we always walk. We wear our running shoes. We walk around the field. Um, there's a scene in the book that's I think it's the best scene in the book where my dad confesses to me during a game that when he rides his bike home after a night game in the dark, he screams. He screams on his bike. He screams
Mm.
alone on the bike path, and he just wails into the night about my brother.
Mm.
And I remember I wanted to ask about it, but it was during a baseball game, and my dad doesn't really like talking about grief that much. You can talk about
Yeah.
losing, but it's only baseball. And I just remember being so curious, like, what is he screaming on his bike, and what is that like? And so when I went to write that scene, I rode my bike on his bike path, how he would go from the ballpark to his home. And it felt like cheating. Like it's writing, but it's really reporting because I just rode the bike and I took the notes and I I understood that that was how he was that was how he was processing some of the physical symptoms because when you have grief, you have like cortisol and adrenaline, your body's flooded with these stress hormones and you can't get them out. And my mom died 4 months to the day after my brother and she hadn't been sick. So part of
Mm.
me always thinks like she was so stressful for her, she didn't have a release because she wasn't like my dad. And I think for my dad, riding his bike and he's gotten an electric bike. He's ridden it 9,000 miles so far, so he's
Oh,
always moving, and I think that's why he's able to survive what he has.
yeah, sure. I certainly understand that. I would like to, obviously, there's really nothing you can say. I'd like to extend my condolences, losing a brother and a mother that close together is very hard to deal with. And I know that you went through a little journey to find. Now you found something that gave you relief, and it restored your relationship with your father. All good things, but you went through a phase where you searched for something, and I want you to talk about that a little bit because you know what, a lot of times people don't have that instant solution. They have to go on a little journey to find something that gives them a recovery and a sense of purpose in their loss. How did you go about that journey?
Well, I'm definitely a grief group dropout. Been to a few grief
Mhm.
groups. It wasn't for me. Um, I gosh, my drag my we're Jewish. I dragged my dad to a Jewish service, morning service, and he's not one for religion. Um, gosh, I went to a weekly Dharma talks. And I actually got a lot out of that. I found that really helpful, and I write about that a lot actually in the book. And the thing I took away from that I'll never ever forget that I write about a lot. I went to this woman locally here in Scottsdale, and she is so brilliant. I changed her name in the book. Her real name is Genevieve. Um, she does like these free Dharma talks every week and a
Mhm.
meditation beforehand for 30 minutes. And she always, tells stories from the Dharma. And one story she had is about this um, a person goes to the Buddha and with problems, and the Buddha says, "You've got 83 problems." Because the person's like, "My farm's not growing any crops. My family doesn't love me. My kids don't respect me. on and on. The Buddha says, you've got 83 problems. And the Buddha says, every human being has 83 problems.
Hmm.
The 84th is thinking that you shouldn't have the first 83.
Mm.
So that just stuck with me because I think I would tend to feel sorry for myself or feel like, why is this happening to me? This is all too much for me to bear. I'm so sad about my brother and I'm taking it too hard and I'm so nervous about Little League and every Little League game I'm pacing and I'm so stressed and my mom's dead and I don't have a mom and just and then I just remember like, yeah, so these are your 83 problems. There's
Mhm.
no use thinking that you shouldn't have these 83 problems. Other people you might not think that they have, but they also have their own 83 problems. Don't give yourself an 84th by, c- by by um by wondering why you have the first 83. Just something
Yeah.
about that made me feel like, "Oh, okay, right. This is, you know, this is my I have to accept that
Yeah.
these are the problems because I can't change it."
But that's a great philosophy, and there's a lot about Buddhism that really resonates with me. I think it's kind of more of a philosophic code of faith more than it is like what you typically think of in a religion, which is a set of rules that you have to abide by. It's more of a guidebook. Maybe that's a good way to put it. But I really like a lot of those philosophies. So that's fantastic. I really like that.
Had you ever heard that? Because everybody thinks of Jay-Z and his 99 problems, but, they don't
Oh,
think of
oh,
Buddha.
that's true. They don't, but I'm glad you brought it up because that's really a great working structure to think about as you go through life. And if you think you're the only one in the world that has this problem or that problem, you're not. And that's why doing things like this, and I really like people like yourself that have written a book and everything because it's so comforting to know that other people have gone through this and they've made it. A lot of times these recovery journeys, there isn't a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but there is hope for a better life. You can get through this and you can make your life a lot more enjoyable and be content with your life despite your losses. And that would be kind of my parting shot for you. What message of hope would you have for someone who is maybe gone through something that, they've lost somebody or what have you, and they just feel like it's never going to get any better? I'm at the end. This is it. It's never going to get any better.
I can promise you this, it's gonna get different.
Hmm.
It's gonna get different, and different is probably better.
Yes. And that's a great way to put it because that's just what I was saying. It may not be the euphoric happiness that you long for, but there is a better life and there is a way to deal with what you've gone through and make your life better and make your loved ones. You can be there for them, and that's what life is all about. So thank you very much. We have been talking to Teresa Strasser, and the book is Making It Home: Life Lessons from a Season of Little League. Now, where can people find the book?
Everywhere you find books, it's available for pre-order now. There's also an audiobook, which I'm very proud of if you're an audiobook person. It's really, really good and very different from the paperback version, but the paperback and the audio book are available for pre-order wherever you find books.
Awesome. Now, where can people find you online? I know you're on Twitter and all these other places. Do you want to talk about that maybe a little bit?
Sure. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Teresa Strasser, TeresaStrasser.
Teresa, thank you so much for coming on the program today. You are, you're one of those people that you have this real strong energy. You have this, you're like a pistol, and that really shines through. And I know it shines through in your work and your attitude. And that's very important that people feel that because you have to feel that strength when you face something like this.
Well, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, talking to Teresa Strasser. The name of the book, Making It Home: life lessons from a season of Little League. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Just a little reminder, I'm Billy Dees, and you can find me on Twitter. Real easy to find at Billy Dees. You can follow me, you can tweet me, but I always say you just got to be nice. A lot of times people aren't, but I would like it if you were nice. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast today, and we will talk to you again next week. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find The Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.